Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, we are going to talk about one of those things that, it is what we are all so passionate about. And it's really about how do we differentiate our products. And one of the things I think we're going to uncover, and one of the things I think we all know, but sometimes forget, that really creating differentiated products and experiences is not something we can do alone. As we've talked about before, like as product managers, there's very little we can do alone. We don't write the code, we don't do the marketing, right? But how do we bring that whole ecosystem together to make sure we are doing really differentiated products and experiences that really set us apart? So today, to help us in that conversation, we have Todd Bracher. He's the founder of Bracher, an industrial design and advisory firm. He has, throughout his career, has worked with big brands that we all know, like 3M and Georg Jensen. He is also the author of a book that just came out in June called Design in Context, a framework for strategic differentiation. And so I think he will be the perfect guest for today's episode. Welcome, Todd.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Todd, I always like to start, I gave a little bit of your bio, but I always like to kind of start with your origin story. And I have to tell you, no pressure here, but every designer I've had, I think you guys have the best origin stories. Like, I really think you always think about this thing really well, but sort of like how you got where you are today and why are you so passionate about the space you play in?
For my origin story, you make it sound like designers have been forged in some sort of volcanic activity or something.
It is a superpower in a way, right?
So mine's not that exciting, actually. So, that's a great question. I started as an illustrator, a drawer, essentially, but I fell in love with science at the same time, and as a young man, and somehow this brought me into what I discovered was industrial design, which was sort of this hybrid of like logic and art in a way. And so that's kind of where it started for me. My father was a cabinet maker, my mother a school teacher. So it really was sort of the bringing together of the two in a way. And but it evolved over now 25 years in the business. And what's to me really interesting about design in general. I don't really see it as like one thing, or it's not really easily definable. Designers come in all shapes and flavors, and so therefore, I feel as though we're always sort of evolving into different, with different capabilities, I guess you could say. But my passion has always been wanting to see the businesses succeed, because I know if I do my work, the business will succeed. And if the business is succeeding, that also means the customer is happy and the customer is also succeeding. So that's sort of my metric for success and what motivates me.
I love that. Yeah. And I have to say, like, the reason I love marketing is, again, that same kind of combination of logic and art and bringing together the creativity and sort of the data business science of it in order to make the most effective and powerful solutions we can make, right? Like,
absolutely.
That's where the excitement lies.
I absolutely agree. Yep.
And I think from a product manager's perspective, what you just said is exactly the designer we all want to work with, right? But
well, it's good to hear.
Yeah. It is, right? But it can feel, and I think this is one of those areas we're going to talk about the relationship between design and product management, where both perspectives matter, right? Because it can feel like, oh, what I have, not me personally, make this very clear, but what I have is the designer who only cares about the art and whether it's pretty, and it takes them forever to do the things, right? And whether that's likely not the designer I have, but either the designer I have or because of the way I work with them and the process there. So tell me a little bit about sort of how you see, and I know you work with a lot of designers and a lot of product management teams, how best, what does it look like when it's really well aligned?
That's a great question. So I hate to say it this way, but not all designers are created equal. So I'm sure you've seen this, and I like to call designers, to me, need to be real experts, and I'll get into what I mean by that. But you go to the doctor, I don't think you walk into a doctor's office and say, my side is hurting, and I just write me a prescription for this, and or call up a surgery for that. Like, I think you wait and you get a diagnosis, and then you get the treatment. And I think a designer needs to work this way. I don't think product management or all the way up to the CEO is, we're not a vendor, we're not an order taker. I think that's sort of setting up for failure in some ways, because a real superpower of a designer, a good designer, is they're able to connect dots that are far beyond, let's say, just the ask, and make this thing nice. Like, that's really too late now. If you're involving a designer at that point, in my opinion, it's a bit late in the process. A designer's real value is getting in early, really understanding, and the designer is, in my opinion, the bridge between the business objectives and the end user, the customer. And the designer is a translator in a way and helps align those two. So that to me is how I think, at least when I work with designers from a product perspective, I try to establish the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and not get into, in other words, sort of the intangible outcomes in a way, and less the hard facts. It's also included, but I'm not trying to shape or control the hand. I think it's more about giving them the freedom to solve it in a way that I don't think was expected, because again, they're the expert in that domain. Allow them to express how they see a solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, every conversation we're going to have is with the caveat that not all designers are created equal, and not all product managers are created equal, right? So sometimes there's a dud on one side, but that's not what we're talking about, because in most of the companies we work with, that's not the case. But I think there's some interesting things that some of it's language, right? So it's talking about outcomes. What we always talk about as product managers is problems. Right? Our job is to understand the problems they have. And, we talk about market problems and going out and researching those. And problems and outcomes are highly correlated, but it is a different lens of which you look through, right? And it's the same thing as you talked about outcomes. We think of very tangible outcomes, right? So they will be able to do this. And there's the intangible part of it that we tend to sometimes, keep saying we, like I'm bringing you all down with me, sorry. No, but it's easy to stomp on the intangibles if you're not really intentional about that.
Yeah, see, now we're getting there. So the approach that I have towards design, I call it contextual design. And contextual design, what I like about it is you don't need to be a designer to understand it. So I think one of the sort of red flags, I guess, when working with a designer, if you don't understand why they've made certain decisions with the design, it's probably not the right designer. Like, why is it red? Why is it this shape? And it just looks nice. That's not a good spot to be in, as you know. And whereas a context-based designer or a contextual designer is considering what I call the governors that control the outcome. And so, for example, there's sort of two examples that come to mind, right? One is a tree. I take you out to the park. We look at this tree here. I don't think, and I say, hey, what do you think of this tree here? And I don't think you'll say, well, you know what? It has too many leaves, or the green is not quite the right green, or the shape of the leaf, I'm not so convinced. It's too tall. Like, I don't think we sort of critique nature this way. I think you accept it. And you say that tree is the tree, and it is that way because it's a result of a context. And therefore, I design the context. I design the ecosystem, and then the tree grows to its shape it needs to be, if that makes sense. So we're taking essentially abstraction out of the design process. And then if you and I were working together on the context for the tree, we would know, well, how much rainfall is there, sunlight, are there invasive species, the nutrition in the soil. Like, you start looking at all those factors. Now I know why the shape of the leaf is what it is. Okay, that's why it's that shape. That's why it's this size. That's why it's this. And that's how I approach the design. I really don't, not to sound kind of flippant about it, I don't care about the design as much as I do about the ecosystem, because then the ecosystem really defines what the design is.
It's a great metaphor, but also you can see where that goes wrong. When we're just focused about outcomes, you get something that feels so easy for us who built it. We're like, it's so obvious. Yes. Why is no one using it? Why does no one think it does X? Right? And part of that is, we did not take into account the who, the when, the how that was involved in the execution of what to us was like looked at in, in isolation, and it was really clear. And how can people be so dumb?
Yeah, and I think it sounds so silly to exactly your point. Like we call it meeting the need. How do we meet the need of the customer, the consumer? And yeah, it's this nice shape. It's just right. It's the right price, so it's going to work well. We like it, so they're going to like it. And then you really start to click into actually what do they need? Is it really addressing their needs? And that's a big deal. Like if you can really get a grasp of that, and you feed that back into this ecosystem, into the context. Then you really are getting somewhere. And what's cool about this approach, in my opinion, is that's where differentiation is found, because your organization itself, your supply chain, your limitations, your capabilities, your destination, your business strategy in 3 years, 5 years, all this is factored into the context. So you're going to get a unique output, which is really cool. So that's where the differentiation ultimately is found. If you're loyal to accounting for the stakeholders, including the end user, including the business, you arrive somewhere that you hadn't planned on. And I think, but it satisfies everyone. And that's really where it's interesting.
I love that. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. When we talk about understanding the context, like I totally am, but I also think you put that practical, you put your deadlines out, and I think, how much context, right? Like I feel like I could go really far with my tree analogy and understanding everything, and then like I've got global warming on top, and like what if what if the tree is hit by lightning? Like there's what I mean?
100%.
So how do you know the right field of vision to focus on?
I think that's where the designer, is the good designer is good and is able to help cull it in a bit, because you're right. You design the whole planet Earth and then the universe, and like how for making this tree, do you draw the line? Exactly to your point. There is a diminishing return at one point where it's not worth actually exploring certain aspects of it. But I think, between you and me, there is a certain forever frustration because the design of a bird is perfect and for what it needs to be. But interestingly enough, so I think about this actually quite a lot. A shark, actually, as an example, there's a lot of nature references here. A shark isn't perfect. A bird is not perfect. If a shark was perfect, it would have eaten all of its prey, right? And so somehow there's a gap in the system, or that's where mutations occur. That's where evolution has this sort of gap in a way. So there is no perfect answer in a way, and I think that's great. And design never could, of course, match the level of nature and the fidelity that nature can address. But I think at the end of the day, we can still, make sure it's the right price, make sure it pulls out of the tool, make sure we can deal with all the sort of real world limiting factors. At the same time, really address the need in a way that's really meaningful to the end user. And if you're really just accounting for sort of the key elements of that, you're already 80% of the way there. So I don't think there's this. I don't think it's actually that difficult to identify where do you sort of draw the line.
Right, you start to see. Yeah, and I think to your point, understanding the context isn't going to necessarily give you the super magical answer, right? Because to your bird, there are many, many kinds of birds, right? And there are even many, many kinds of birds in my backyard right now making loud noises that you guys can't hear.
Lucky you.
Right, but I know it is really great. But in that same ecosystem, there are still a whole bunch, right?
I mean, I love Darwin's example of the finch, right, on Galapagos. And there's a dozen or so, maybe more, of different finches within the same ecosystem. But when you consider each of the one's context, when you start to kind of click into it, well, one is feeding nectar, so it has a certain shaped beak. One is feeding on insects, so it has a different shaped beak. Another one is feeding between bark, another one between grass. So they have different sort of use cases in the world. So they have a different version to deal with it better. Whereas if, a designer gets in a room and says, let's just make a bird, well, what are we really solving for? Like when you really get into it, it's going to arrive somewhere unique to what else is in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing we talk about then, you mentioned, okay, so we understand the context and we know what will be successful. That success metric, what does that look like to you? Or metrics, because I bet there's more than one.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. So I kind of there's like a couple other things I want to touch on. So There's a few factors that I look at, and you could even predict to a certain extent the potential success of a product, which is kind of interesting, even in the concept state. So I have created a little tool that I have on my website called the Market Efficacy tool, or it's an Efficacy Index, the MEI. And what we do is it's a series of just 10 questions, and it's free to just try it out. And it's what's cool is it gives you back direct feedback based on a series of questions, and it addresses how well it thinks you're addressing the market need, how well your product is scalable, which I want to touch on that in a second. It gets into how well differentiated it is and how well integrated to the organization in terms of its capabilities it is. And just in these handful of questions, you get back a bit of information from this little tool that will say, hey, you know what, your differentiation is great, but it's not a scalable product. And or it's really suits the market need really well, but it's short in these other aspects. And it will feedback to you on things you can consider. And what I find interesting, for example, scalability. So, and now on the marketing side of things, it's relative scalability. So is the solution scalable? I don't necessarily mean, can you print 10 million of them? Is the software copy pastable? Like, that's not really what I mean. Is it not compatible on devices? That's not what I mean. Scalable in a sense of, can someone quickly understand it? And then can a lot of people quickly understand it? And then can a lot of people actually fall in love with it and share it with their friends? And it extends and scales from beyond that. And we early on see really great ideas that are not well executed, and they're so hard to communicate to people, and they die in the market. And less good designs, less good solutions are winning. Let's say less good solutions are winning because the idea is clear and or the design is clear, but the efficacy is not so great. But people are okay with that because there's less friction. So to me, I look at factors. Really important one is scalability, or this sort of the non-complexity of the idea. And I'm happy to talk more about that because it's an efficiency of an outcome that I find really important.
No, I really like that too. And I really like that definition of scalability. So could someone understand it quickly? Can lots of people understand it quickly? And can lots of people fall in love with it quickly? Like, is that idea, can the idea of it go viral, for lack of a better word, right?
Right.
Because you're right, you see it where and this is what keeps us marketing people in business, right? Like people who can't explain what they do well. Like they do something really powerful, but they haven't unlocked how to show it or talk about it.
I mean, you could put, and I'm making up numbers, $500,000 is, it's a lot more than that, into the marketing of something, or you could put it into the design of something. And I feel as though it makes sense to put it into the design so that you could really, really deliver a product that is understandable and basically markets itself. And I know Tesla says they don't have a marketing department, and I don't know if that's true, but I kind of believe them. I don't have a dog, but I've heard of dog mode, and I think that's something that I feel like a designer, in this case probably Elon, but a designer would have come up with, because it's a real user need, and but it in theory doesn't cost anything. It's just part of the software, and it can that problem is relatively easy to solve. But it's became a viral conversation, and even my mother is aware of Tesla because they have dog mode. She doesn't have a dog either. So that's kind of what I mean. You could market how great the curves of the car are. Yeah, that's not going to get anywhere. But if you've got meaningful solutions, then they're going to market themselves.
Yes. Now, as a marketing person, I will wrestle you a little bit on that. But I conceptually agree. I cannot fix bad products with good marketing in the long term. I may be able to put a Band-Aid on it for a really short period of time, right? And make some sparkle, but it's not going to work. Yeah. That being said, that, for the most part, if you built it and it's great, but no one knows about it, it's just a really good product in your garage.
Yep, and that's right. That's the other extreme. That's exactly right.
But you're right. Like, I can't fix. I mean, I can ruin a good product to some degree with bad marketing, but I can't fix it fundamentally. And so when those two go together, and there's pieces of that, you get to amplify the story that was the sort of the growth that would happen organically because it is a good product. My job then is to amplify that and make it go a little bit faster, right? Feed the flames of what's already been built in there.
Totally agree. And I can't think of anything worse than trying to, market a bad product, because once it's in the laps of the customer, they're going to know it's bad. And that's the beginning of the end of any loyalty with these folks.
Yeah. Bad products and vaporware. Two things I've glad not to do anymore.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, I love this whole scalable idea, and I love sort of the tool, which we'll definitely give people the link to, because that's a great tool. Like, hey, let's just check ourselves and make sure what we're talking about fits a market need, is scalable, is differentiated. And that fourth part, integrated with the business, is interesting too, because like we talk about this in our classes, there are good problems to solve that doesn't make sense for you to solve it, right?
Correct.
Like, this is just not your specialty. This is not where you're known. This is not what you're good at. This is not where your resources lie. So all four of those I could see being really powerful pillars to kind of talk about, hey, does this idea have wings?
Yeah, I agree. It's more than a gut check. It's not going to predict 100 years into the future, but it can definitely poke at some maybe soft spots and cause a little bit of further study. And I think that to me is quite valuable, because it doesn't care what you think. It's going to just respond based on the data. So I think that I think is helpful, especially folks that are in startup mode, or because you can get quite drunk on your own ideas. I know I do, and so this is a way to kind of reality check you.
And I want to double click on that, because differentiated is something that we often will go to the grave saying like, this is super differentiated, but like it is in our minds because we know this specific thing. But like when these questions, and how do you think about differentiation in a way that it has to matter to others? It doesn't matter if it's differentiated to me. Like I can pull apart the threads and see why it's different. But the level of differentiation we're talking about is like it's differentiated in the minds of the market, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, again, I don't know why I have all these analogies today, but I think of, a singer, right? And you're a new brand, a new business, and you have your voice, singing voice, and here you're coming out into the world, and you sound exactly like another singer, Madonna, whatever. And, well, that's going to be a challenge, because they don't need another one. There already is a singer already. So you have to find what is your unique voice, and in a way that's not just unique, but it's also relevant and resonating with that market, so that it's a timely unique, if that makes sense. And that's sort of the big by the way. So it's not just doing different for the sake of being different. It's understanding the market and the context well enough, the culture well enough, to know what does relevant different mean.
Right. Do you have any good examples of products and spaces?
Yeah, well, I mean, sustainability has always been one, but more recently, right? So a lot of folks, the consumer market, of course, has shifted since COVID quite drastically. I mean, there's a handful of ideas. Let me think which ones I could even share that make sense. Well, here's one for you. This is kind of interesting. So I have a business called Better Lab, which is a sort of venture platform that I have since several years, and it's where my studio work is client work, and then Better Lab is self-initiated. And I've gotten to know many scientists over the years, and one scientist I've worked with for a long while had created the light into International Space Station, and he's also created what's called UVC. He has a pretty key patent around UVC light, which is germicidal light. So I had a different take on what we can use this lighting for. So by that I mean I had, at the time during COVID, the early parts of COVID, I had two small boys, and I still do. They're not as small anymore. And we would go to the store, right? And everyone was masked up, if you remember, and plastic everywhere. And we would have to lather our hands in liquid gel sanitizer. And I remember a 5-year-old boy putting kind of chemicals on his hands. I just didn't feel good about that. I didn't know what's in the chemicals. I didn't know what to think. So anyhow, I came up with the suggestion to take this technology that we're using for architecture and instead you put it in a hand device so that we're able to put the light on hands, and which is one of the causes of spreading any kind of virals. It's not just through coughing and airborne, but also through contact. So and as we dug deeper into this, we found that liquid sanitizers are responsible for 2% of the global carbon footprint. When you consider the amount of transportation, the big jugs, the plastic bottles, they're fire hazards, they cause eczema. the water consumption, manufacturing. They're terrible in some ways. And so we would be displacing all of that. And then the last part, I have a friend where she manages one of the national banks, and she said they spend about $30,000 a bank just to manage the liquid sanitizers. And I thought, wow, a small business couldn't do this. And so our device for just a few $100s completely replaces that, and at no ongoing expense as well. So all this to say, the idea that started for architecture, and then we sort of put the design eyes and then the market need together, and we came with this new solution. And how it's really differentiated too is just from a sustainability perspective. It's like a really great, by the way, it's a better product, and by the way, it's better for the environment. So there are these sort of other aspects that we learned sort of later into the process.
I had no idea. I'm still just thrown off by the $30,000 a year per branch
crazy
to manage the sanitizer. You just take it for granted.
Yep.
And also would not have thought about the impact that would have, the footprint it was leaving, because it was, at the time, you get it too. The time this was like a life-saving thing, right, in your mind.
Yeah.
So, but understanding that we could still provide that kind of benefit, but really thinking about it more holistically is a really neat way of thinking about differentiation.
Thank you.
So let's bring this home. So we've got a bunch of product managers. They are listening, right? And they are like, this is really super interesting, and I really like it. How do we set up these big enterprise companies we work with? How do we give room and space for this kind of effort? And how do we how do we partner with our designers better? How do we get the organization to think differently? There's 20 questions there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a really important question, and not that I have any silver bullet myself. I can tell you my work with 3M, which was very interesting. This huge multinational, and they have a design department, and they understand to a certain extent design. And this was now going back even 6-7 years ago. So it's even then was maybe early days for incorporating design. And it was a struggle because in the beginning it was lawyers, chemical engineers, scientists drove the business, and then design. What's that? It's you guys just make it red. That was kind of the idea. You use our
Post-it notes. That's where it ends, my friend.
yeah, exactly. And we were creating a lighting business together. I was helping them stand up a lighting business and to sell to architects and designers. So a community I know very well. So all this to say, how I managed through this, and this doesn't really answer your questions, but maybe triggers follow-up for you to help go down the road of addressing your questions, was what we did was we showed how we can gain traction in the market with the work we were doing. We sort of roadmaps how we're going to birth this company, if that makes sense. And it was less critical what actually the products were. Those products, of course, laddered up to help show how we're going to get this business stood up, and how we can do it within a 12-month time frame and leverage existing IP and the whole thing. But it wasn't. We didn't really have that super detailed conversations around, well, what shape is it? No one seemed to care, which was cool because I think we set it up well where the objective was, if we do it right, we're going to move the business over there, which is where we're trying to go. And that was what we all looked at. And that's how we measured if it was successful. Did we win the awards that they wanted to get, the visibility? Did we get the Fast Company story, which we did? And do we get all the kind of big attention we were shooting for? And then the sales came with it. And that's, so I think there's something in this, and I'm curious your thoughts around not so much looking at it with a microscope, the work we're doing again, but more this whole holistic approach is, I think, a healthy way to have a process with a designer.
That's a great thing. I mean, and I think it zooms out a little bit. The more we are aligned here, right? And then we stop, not that we stop worrying about the details, but we start trusting the other person to handle the details that are theirs, right? But because we know where we're all going. So, and we can frame why we're doing or not doing something in relation to this top vision that we've aligned on. So it totally makes sense. I also think one of the things you talk about when you talk about context, you've brought this up a couple of times, it's not just the context of the market, but it's the context of the business and what is the
Yes.
business trying to accomplish. And too often when we break that down into our backlog items and our to-dos, it becomes our vision is to, our mission is to release feature X, and it's not, right? And so making sure that business context is understood and aligned on seems like a big part of this effort, kind of top to bottom.
Yeah, 100%. And, I see design as sort of levers that we're pulling to help propel the business in any direction leadership wants to go. And, but without that understanding, I don't know, we're just sort of arbitrarily doing the best we can. And I think that's really dangerous. So I think it's really about helping not just the designer, but it's the group that's creating the solution to really to really have an alignment and understanding like where we're trying to go as an organization.
That makes a lot of sense. I still think sometimes there is tension in the further in the execution spot, right? So maybe not where you're often working with organizations at a kind of strategic definition level, but still like where the rubber meets the road.
Yep.
Who's going to own what is still sometimes a pressure point. And I think that may be the source of the problem, right? Is maybe a terrible word and you shouldn't think about it that way.
Am I wrong to say? Because I've experienced that to be fair, there are lanes still, I recognize that. And, but I think when we're all on the same page, like we own it together. And I think that's really where it works.
As I phrased the question, I went, well, that's the problem. It's the thinking that, well, I own this and you own that. Versus we own this and I can do this part and I can do this part. Right. Yeah. But I do. It is, when you get down to I need a RACI document to know who's going to talk to the client at this point.
Yep.
You've missed the spirit of the world. Right.
A little bit, but you still need these tools. Yeah. You still need, we got to be, realistic too. So, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, we've talked about so many fun things today. In terms of differentiation, because I know that's a big part of your book, right? And differentiation, because you have contextual design, what are some of the other ways you help organizations think about differentiation and ensure that they're really focused on it?
Yeah, I think maybe one of the more obvious ones too is leveraging supply chain. And so knowing, let's say you're working in glass or you're working with a specific vendor or you have a technology that's unique to yours. I think that's one that we really lean into. But I think the biggest one, I'll be honest with you, is IP. And I think what often happens, and this is a big conversation now, is I think what often happens is, because I've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it, there's a fair amount of IP that's sort of in the drawer. And I think there's dormant opportunities that are not being leveraged and for a variety of reasons. So I think, for example, we have one patent that we're working with that are on as a piece of paper. I don't think folks understand its value and what good it has. But when I show you the design and it helps with children's eye health, and it reverses myopia, which is it's an emerging epidemic. You'll be hearing about it, and in the next 5 to 10 years. Parentheses: if you have small kids, get them into sunlight, get them outside. Screen time, LEDs, value engineered LEDs, indoor time, longer school days, homework, all this stuff is causing kids have replaced outdoor time with screen time. It's causing kids to have a less developed eye through their childhood, which leads to myopia, which is a vision impairment. And it turns out 10% of these folks in their lifetime will go blind. Oh, wow. It's a first world problem. Half of the globe will be myopic by 2050. It's a major problem. And the gentleman, another scientist, has a patent that reverses this, and it's in the drawer. And it sounds good, but when you don't really know how to understand it, but with design, we're able to, we actually show a way to deliver the solution through using, it costs us a few pennies. And it's fantastic. Whereas if you could, in other words, you can interpret the patent in a very expensive, capital investment heavy way, or you can find another path, which we did, which costs pennies and could be widely adopted. So, but the piece of paper, you wouldn't know what to think. It could be anything. So that to me is where a real differentiation can live, is pairing up a lot of dormant patents that are sitting there that have incredible value that I don't think is understood what to do, how to leverage this value in a way. In some cases,
that's really interesting. So it's that they have some IP, they have some patents, but they haven't really been able to activate them, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
Either because they haven't dreamed of how it might happen in a way that is scalable and differentiated, right? Or they haven't been able to help others see it, right? Like that's another part of it. Like I need you to believe this, so you invest or you partner or whatever the case may be.
That's 100% right. And it's also not usually their scope. They might be an academic, corporate scientist for other reasons, and they're genius at creating the solutions, and but I'm the guy that says how many we can get out of the tool and run this thing in a way that can get it into people's lives. So from a manufacturing perspective. So I think that's again where these sort of two come hand in hand. And typically designers or guys and girls like me don't have access to this thing. So we're not part of that conversation. And I find that a miss. That's where differentiation could easily have been picked up, in my opinion.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Like if the designer was there earlier, the idea, we can explore the idea and the execution in different ways. It is a valuable perspective in the beginning. Not like to your point, it's not the person who makes it pretty at the end. It's person who helps us think through the context and how we might deliver differently.
I mean, making something beautiful is the easiest thing, right? Making something that's beautiful, that works really well at the right price, at the right time, at the right scale, and all the other aspects, that's really difficult. And so to have a designer show up and just make it pretty, you're sort of not really getting the benefit of working with a good designer.
Yeah. No, that I think is excellent advice. And it's true, right? We've all seen it. It's easy to forget it. But we all know from our own, from the purely product perspective, we know the difference between, oh man, we're just building a lot of stuff and we've taken the time to figure out what the right problem it is to solve. Now we want to at the same time take what problem to solve to what is the most scalable, lovable, differentiated way to solve it. And that really is where you start to bring in that is where the designer really shines. And if you don't have them there, you've already limited your options. You've already limited your potential by not having someone who can kind of look at it differently.
That's right. But my advice to that is, again, as you know, not all designers are created equal. So if they're communicating in a way that you don't understand, it's not the right designer. So it's not like you can just throw anybody in there. So it's really about finding a pair, someone that communicates well and they make a case for what they see in a way that you grasp. And it's, for me personally, back to your very first question, is it's taken 20-something years to learn the vocabulary of the business world. We're not trained in that. So it's, so it takes time also. So it's not so simple as plug and play a designer, but if you really find the right recipe, it works well.
No, and it's something else that we talk about at Pragmatic is that, designers go to design school. It doesn't necessarily have a business school component. So there is a different language. There is, there are levers that matter a great to the business that the designer needs to understand because it's part of that context that we talk about. So
correct.
There's both not everyone has it right away, but it's also what are you as an organization doing to build that understanding and language within your design teams, right? So that they come and there is at least some communication spots. Like both sides need to understand the other better or more fully to really be able, I think, to optimize the work together.
Fully agree.
Awesome. All right. We talked about lots of different things today. If you were going to have people do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would it be? This is where everyone always tries to sneak in a third. I'm like, I said 2.
2 things. I think, 2 things differently, you said? As a product manager?
Yes.
2 things differently. Wow. I mean, that's if people suck in 3, because that's really difficult.
Added all the pressure in the beginning.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like the first thing my mind goes to is I think leaving space for a different way of thinking. I think, and you could tell me best, of course, I don't think product management is sort of just start ticking boxes and kind of flying through. I think it's a very dynamic situation. And I think relative to when design is involved is to allow a series of different thoughts to come through. But I think it needs to be wider than, again, just sort of solving what's on the product requirements document. I think it's got to be broader than that. And that, to me, is the biggest hurdle I see. Again, if the plane is, going down, like no matter design is going to save it, right? So we really got to get in early. So maybe that's sort of 1.5, 2 things is it's really trying to broaden what that PRD is and trying to get to a place where we might have solutions that we didn't expect. Because I think often design, when it hits a designer, I feel like folks kind of know what it is already before it kind of gets to the design stage.
This is the solution. Help it be best. And you're like, no. Help us define the right solution.
Yeah, I think that's right. And because what do you know? It's much cheaper, it's faster, it's easier, it's better, it's more differentiated. All these good things, all the things you want, if you lay that out in the beginning and then throw the design team at it and others, I think you'll arrive somewhere you did not anticipate and you'll say, wow, this is better.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, Todd, this was a great conversation. If people want to learn more from you and about you, where should we send them?
Yeah, so my business, Bracher.com, BRACHER.com. You'll see it there. And then, of course, betterlab.com. You'll have all the information you need there. My Market Efficacy Index is also listed on Bracher.com. So you can give it a go and see what insights you might gain there.
Great. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. If you were inspired by my conversation with Todd, and how could you not be, we have 2 really good courses for you. One is the design course. This is for product managers to understand a little bit more the design process and to figure out at a more specific execution level how you can integrate that design team into your work to make sure you are creating the optimal solutions, the ones that are really differentiated. On the other hand, for the designers listening or for your design team, it's true, right? There's a lot about the business and the business lovers that they don't teach in business school or in design school. They teach in business school. So if you want to help your team of designers really understand the language of the business and some of the goals that you have as a product manager and as you represent for the business itself, then we have a course called Business Strategy and Design, which talks exactly through this. So if you get your teams to go to those 2 courses, I think it will really help unlock the potential that Todd talks about.